Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Princeton Public Library. My name is Jamie Herman, and I'm the manager of adult programming here at the library. It is my great pleasure to welcome everyone here tonight, both in person in our community room, as well as online via YouTube, to the annual Phyllis Marchand Leadership Lecture. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Please note that this room is equipped with a hearing loop that pairs with T-coil technology. If you need hearing assistance, T-coil-enabled headphones are available for your use. Just raise your hands and we'll bring you some headphones. We kindly ask that you silence your devices during the talk and hold your questions, as there will be a chance for audience question and answer at the end of the presentation. There will also be a book signing and refreshments after the lecture. We would like to thank Labyrinth Books for being here tonight to support this event, and to all of the donors who make the Phyllis Marchand Leadership Lecture Fund a reality, so that we can bring these types of programs to the community in memory of Phyllis Marchand. I am now going to turn the podium over to Deborah Marchand to speak about the lecture series and to introduce our esteemed speaker for this evening. Welcome, Deborah.
Well, I was going to say, for those of you who don't know me, but now you obviously all know who I am. I'm Deborah Marchand. My mom was Phyllis Marchand, and this is a lecture series that she felt very strongly about in terms of helping advance leadership in our community. And I'm thrilled to be back for another event celebrating women in leadership as part of the Phyllis Marchand Leadership Lecture Series. Every time I come into a library, any library, this library or my library, I'm reminded of how egalitarian it is. Open to anyone of any race, any religion, any color, any pronoun. In our current political and social environment, it's more important than ever that our communities support public libraries and their programming. With the attempt to ban books doubling in 2022, the Princeton Public Library's mission to, quote, engage, inspire, educate, and unite everyone in our diverse community is why my mother, along with her friends and supporters sitting around a kitchen island one evening, decided that this is where she would leave a legacy to inspire women in her community for years to come. As a leader, my mother sometimes took unpopular positions on sensitive issues to better the community. The massive renovation of this library is a good example. She and Golda Meir, who Professor Lahav will discuss this evening, had this in common. Mrs. Meyer was known to have said, quote, I can honestly say that I was never affected by the question of success of an undertaking. If I felt it was the right thing to do, I was for it, regardless of the possible outcome. When you're in the weeds, that is a bold and sometimes lonely position to take. It requires strength of will and of character. To me, when I consider Professor Lahav's examination of Golda Meir, I see undertones of what many women, including my mother and sometimes myself, experience trying to make their way in traditionally male-dominated fields. I periodically cross paths with some of my mother's contemporaries who say exactly what Professor Lahav uses as her title. She was the only woman in the room. The truth is, you can't face all that opposition without a lot of support, a little humility, and a sense of humor. In reading up for tonight's lecture, I came across this Golda Meir quote, which I'd like to share with you because I know my mother would have loved it. Mrs. Meir said this, quote, let me tell you something that we Israelis have against Moses. He took us 40 years through the desert in order to bring us to the one spot in the Middle East that has no oil. And with that bit of levity, please join me in welcoming Professor Pnina Lahav.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Really appreciate it. very useful saying about the oil in the Middle East or Moses, because it never fails to get people to laugh.
Yeah.
Never fails. Okay, so now let me look for my notes. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So good evening, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, the leadership of the library, for inviting me. It is an honor to be invited to Princeton, a prestigious place for many reasons, among them for being the home of my publisher, the publisher of my book on Golda Meir, Princeton University Press. It is also a particular honor and pleasure to deliver a lecture named after Phyllis Marchand. Phyllis Marchand was a community leader, and Golda Meir likewise started her career as a community leader, and like Phyllis, dedicated her life to the public interest. There is a similarity and connection here that is especially pleasing and rewarding. My thanks go to Janie Herman for organizing the event, and to Terry McIntyre, to Don Frost for giving this event its framework and structure, and to Kim Dorman for taking such good care of me today. I very much appreciate it. Warmed my heart. So I'm very grateful to all of you. Let me begin by reflecting on why I decided to write this biography. There are numerous biographies of Golda Meir in the market. The best is Meron Medzini's excellent Golda Meir, a political biography. And following in its footsteps is Francine Klaxbrun's fine biography titled Lioness. So you see the fantasy here that Golda was a lioness, and you could ask yourself, was she a lioness? But, that's a question. I came to this project by way of seeking closure. I started my career with a provocative article titled The Status of Women in Israel, Myth and Reality, where I strove to disprove the widespread myth that in Israeli law and culture, women are equal to men. Israelis used Golda's ascent to power as proof that in Israeli society, men and women were equal. That was 1974, when I was still a graduate student at Yale Law School. Almost 50 years later, I was contemplating my retirement and looked for an appropriate project that would end my career with a bit of a bang. I knew that I wanted to return to the subject of the status of women. I thought that, and I just wanted you to know, all of you, that to write about the status of women in law school today is relatively easy. When I started my career, was very dangerous, okay, and could cost me my tenure. So it was not easy to decide to write about that subject, and please take it to mind. I thought that addressing the history of women in Israel, their struggle for gender equality, their achievements as well as their disappointments, would be the right path. This time I wished to focus on women as role models, women who, despite the challenges, persevered and reached positions of leadership. In other words, women who exercised agency and action. Golda represented the success and the failures of this remarkable history of Israeli women. So my book on Golda presents not only the history of Israeli women, but also a call on women everywhere to reappraise Golda, to appreciate her life work, to embrace her as a leader, but also as a sister in the never-ending struggle for equality and self-fulfillment. Let me begin with Golda's overall trajectory. Golda was born to a very traditional Jewish family in Imperial Russia, and her family immigrated to the United States in 1906, together with hundreds of thousands of Jews from Eastern Europe. Her parents expected her to grow into a traditional woman, a true balabuster, meaning running a Yiddish term from homemaker. Her mother trained her to keep the house clean, to mend and iron the family clothing, to cook the traditional dishes from gefilte fish to chicken soup, and most importantly, marry a well-to-do man who would support her and her family. That was the crucial point. In other words, her parents were thinking inside the box. They did not expect anything that was not ordinary or conventional. And then, when we look at my slides, we see a transformation. Golda became a prominent politician, as you can see here. And you can see her, I actually, originally I did not like this photo, and I didn't want it on the cover of my book. But my editor insisted, and in hindsight I want you to know, I think that he was right. So I'm glad that he literally bent my heart to do it. And you see her here, how she, she's very tense, right? Very determined. You see her lips. And you see that she's very authentic. She's not coiffed. I'll show you later a picture of Margaret Thatcher, so that you can compare. Who was also we may not like her, but she was a great leader, okay? And liked very much by the British people, not always by the Queen. And she, but Golda was not coiffed, did not dye her hair, did not pretend to be something that she was not, did not try to present a different persona. She was very authentic, which is very interesting to reflect upon. Now what is the transformation? She became a prominent politician, Golda. She was the first and only Israeli woman to hold the title of Prime Minister of Israel, and in this capacity interacted with the great and the mighty on the international stage. So maybe if we go to slide 1, 2, 3, we will see the transformation. So here is Golda at the turn of the 18th century, right before they immigrated to the United States. The family immigrated. You see that she is very contemplative and serious. You see the ribbons on her hair. So the whole purpose is to show her father, who was already in New York, that he has this sweet little girl, okay, that he should bring over to New York. That was the idea, okay? And so the dress, by the way, the family was very poor, so the dress was rented from the photographer. That's what they used to do in those days, okay? And the ribbons were rented, the whole thing was rented for the purpose of this occasion. And then if we go forward, let me see. So you see again, she's, contemplative, she's slightly, I don't know if sad, but, not terribly happy, and probably thinking about her father who is in New York, trying to impress him, that it's time to bring the family over because she misses him. And this rose, just for your information, is also paper-made. So the whole thing reflects poverty, okay? Renting the signals of a middle class, but it's basically a working class family, which is interesting by itself. Okay, so this Golda, as you see here, a beautiful little girl, she was supposed to become a wife, to find a good guy who will support her. Okay, who will have enough money to support the family so that they don't have to work. The mother doesn't have to work, and that they don't starve, because starvation was a very important issue. And now the interesting thing is, and if we continue with the slides, here is Golda, also raised to be a beautiful teenager. Yes, and she was very proud of her hair. She had curly hair, so you see her. This is a picture a photo that she prepared for her boyfriend, whom she later married, Maurice Meyerson. And she sent him this photo from Milwaukee to wherever he was. And you see that, she wanted to be beautiful. That's what she thought about. Okay, not to be prime minister, not to be a politician, not to be an actor in politics. She just wanted to look good. Okay, So, which is not contradictory, but that's what she was consumed with in those days. Okay, so we go forward with the slides, and then what you see is the agency, what I call agency. That is from a little girl with ribbons in her hair, and she becomes a politician, a well-known politician. And here she is invited to the White House, which is the pinnacle of achievement in Israeli culture. If you get to be, you know that Netanyahu was not invited or was disinvited by Biden to the White House. She got invited to the White House, and she is walking here with the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, and Pat Nixon, and she is here not in the capacity of the wife, but in the capacity of the Prime Minister of Israel, who comes to the White House to discuss matters of war and peace, or if you wish, to discuss how many phantom jests are you going to give us this round, because we cannot survive without them. Okay, that was her role. Her business when she was there at this moment. So to me, these slides tell the story of thinking out of the box, okay, of taking action. And that is Golda's agency. She wanted to become somebody, and she became somebody. But not only to become somebody for the purpose of being famous, she wanted to become somebody in order to do things in politics, okay, to accomplish policy and take action. And that's exactly what she did. So consider this trajectory from a little girl groomed to be a white housewife, a balabuster, okay, in Russia, under the Tsar, who becomes chief decision maker of her country, and she is acknowledged as such by the entire world. So this is quite significant and revolutionary for that for the those days, still today. That's the amazing thing, and that's what I hoped every man and woman takes to heart. We have in our history, I'm talking about Israeli history now and Jewish history, men and women who rose to these heights, and we should study them and we should be proud of their achievement. That was the purpose, actually, of my book. The question that I wanted to address is, how did she do it? What obstacles did she encounter on her way, and how did she overcome them? That's what my book is about. Another angle of Golda's feminist profile, which I discuss in my book, is Golda's more specific contributions to the welfare of Israeli women. Golda believed deeply in socialism. And for many years, she was the leader of Mapai, Israel's powerful labor party. In 1949, 1 year after Israel's independence, she prevailed upon Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion to give her the labor portfolio in the first Israeli cabinet. In this capacity, she brought the American New Deal to Israel. And I will talk momentarily about her legislation, but I just want to show you the first Israeli cabinet. So first of all, for your information, this has to do with war. You will do it. She's surrounded here by the military machine. Okay. And this is the only way. I hope that we will see this photo. I thought it came earlier. Is it possible?
Let's see.
No. I want to show the cabinet meeting. There was a cabinet meeting, which I hope we see. Yes. Okay. So this is the cabinet meeting. Thank you. This is the first. This is actually the first Israeli cabinet meeting. You see 12 ministers here, in contradistinction to 31 that Netanyahu has in his cabinet right now. And what is interesting about this photo is, first of all, the meeting was held on the 1st of May. Okay? So this was a statement by the Israeli cabinet and by the Israeli government that we are socialists. And we are recognizing the importance of the, May 1st in our history. Now, when you look at this, first of all, let me dwell on this photo, because it's a photo that tells us a lot of things in addition to the date, which is May 1st. So first of all, so you see all of them are men. There is only one woman here, Golda Meir. And what you see is Golda is seated at the corner here, and you see her feet, in bandages. She just came back from Brooklyn, New York, where she was fundraising, and she was involved in a car accident. She was in the hospital, and her doctors told her that she needs to sit and rest for a while before she resumes travel. But the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs told her, Golda, you must rush, because the Russians are waiting for you to go to Moscow and become the Israeli emissary in Moscow. And she did. So she got up from bed with her bandages and everything, and she went to Moscow, and her doctors told her, this is not good for you, you're not going to recover properly. And indeed, she did not recover properly. So this is Golda, the politician, doing what's necessary for the state, doing what's necessary for politics before she thinks about her health. So in this, I just want to dwell, if you allow me, on this photo for several more minutes. First of all, you see a small cabinet with 12 ministers. You see David Ben-Gurion here sitting at the head of the table. You see Theodor Herzl, the visionary who predicted a Jewish state. But the other thing that you see here, and I'm not going to tell you everything that we see here, not to bore you, but the other thing that you see here is two of the ministers here. All the ministers here are male except for Golda. Two of the ministers are Golda's lovers, either were past lovers or present lovers. Okay? Okay, so I don't know if they were lovers too at the same time. Some people say yes, some people say no. But in any event, the one sitting next to her is Zalman Shazar, who was the third president of the State of Israel. Okay, and over there at the right underneath Theodor Herzl, you see the guy with the glasses is David Remez, who was one of Israel's most famous, most prominent economic consultant and policymaker, and he was her lover for many, many years as well. So that's quite interesting, right? When you look at a small cabinet meeting like that with several also religious people who would not consider keeping a lover as a part of the sport of the day. So in any event, and what you see here also is her signal feature. Golda's is her handbag on the floor here. So that's this cabinet again. I'm very fond of it because it really tells you a great deal about Golda. Okay, two lovers. Okay, dedication to the interest of the state above everything else, and you see, in my opinion, she's very tired here and not healthy. But she always put the state and the interest of the state above anything. Now this photo, I don't know why.
I don't know how it changed.
Huh?
It just changed.
It just said, okay, it just changed. So let's just talk about this for momentarily. It's nice. You can learn a great deal from photos. So Golda loved politics, as I'm going to, insist several times today. Politics was her mission. Politics was her life. That's what she liked to do. And David Remez, sitting here, her lover, yes, who taught her a great deal about politics. She was relatively young. She was, I think, 26, 27 when she met him. They were both married. It didn't bother them. And you can see when she sits next to him, that's what she loves to do. She sits next to the guy that she loves, but they talk politics, okay? So this is a meeting of the first Israeli Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, and this is really a great accomplishment for her, okay? Because not only is she sitting next to the guy that she loved, but the guys that she loved also speak to her and plans with her issues of politics. That was the kind of life that she liked to lead. And so you see here the self-fulfillment very strongly. All right, so, okay, so now let me see. Let me go back to my text, if you don't mind. Okay, so I want to go back also momentarily to Golda's specific contributions to the welfare of Israeli women. Golda believed deeply in socialism, and for many years she was a leader of Mapai, the most powerful labor party in Israel. In 1949, 1 year after Israel's independence, she prevailed upon Prime Minister Ben-Gurion to give her the labor portfolio in the first Israeli cabinet, which we just talked about. In this capacity, she brought the American New Deal to Israel. Her legislation included statutes that guaranteed maximum hours of work, not more than 8 hours per person per day, and everybody who is familiar with the New Deal immediately recognized the aspects of this great accomplishment. Not more than 8 hours per person per day, minimum wages, mandatory annual vacation, sick leave, and more. The jewel in the crown was Israel's social security law, which guaranteed a decent quality of life to all Israelis, Jews and Arabs. This law was enacted against the fierce opposition of the Minister of Finance, as you can imagine, who rejected the idea because he thought that Israel could not afford it. But she insisted that the state would pay for it, regardless of whether it can survive the task or not. A piece of this agenda targeted women's rights. In the United States, we still do not have mandatory maternity leave, and take this to heart. For Israelis, mandatory maternity leave is a part of the law of nature. Of course you are entitled to maternity leave. Okay? I always like to ask young people in Israel, what do you think of maternity leave? Of course, everybody should have, every woman should have a maternity leave, and fathers as well. Not in the United States. In the United States, we depend on the goodwill of the employers. Golda led the Knesset to enact mandatory maternity leave as early as 1954. The result was that working mothers were protected under law. They could not be fired by the employer because they were pregnant. And when they gave birth, the employer was obliged under law to let them stay at home for 3 months in order to care for the newborn, with pay. Under her leadership, the state of Israel took it upon itself to pay for this mandatory maternity leave. So the law said that maternity leave will be with pay, but the government did not expect the employer to pay for it. The government paid for it by itself, okay? Which was, of course, meant more taxes for Israelis, but it was it removed the lifted the burden from the employers, and thereby, I think, lowered the level of animosity to such a socialist policy. A controversial issue that came up in this context was the possibility of allowing the pregnant woman to take time off prior to birth, a few days or a few weeks before her due date. In the legislative committee, the argument was raised that a woman might abuse this privilege, and therefore it was suggested that a pregnant woman should be required to bring a medical certificate that confirms that she does indeed qualify for the privilege. You will recognize this idea as paternalistic, a distrust in the woman's ability to make an honest decision, to exercise agency. During the parliamentary debate, Golda, the Minister of Labor, rejected this paternalistic attitude, and I quote, "Let her make her decision by herself," she declared. And to the opposition, those who were very skeptical about the ability of the woman to do that, not to abuse this privilege, Golda said, and I quote, I love this quote, "Members of the Knesset, you must understand that the woman is not a Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuch in Yiddish, Nebish, you may have heard this word, is an inept person, a person who is not capable of action. Okay, the woman is not a Nebuchil, and she continued. Nebuchil, so Nebuchil is a female for Nebuch or Nebish in Yiddish, and Golda continued. The woman knows quite well what is good for her and can act accordingly. Okay, so she is educating the members of parliament about this. This is a memorable sentence, and I urge you to remember it. The woman is not an Nebuchil, and again we return to the theme of agency. Golda pursued the idea of agency not only for herself, but for women in general. Women can and should be able to make their own decisions. Similarly, throughout the debate, and in other contexts as well, Golda stated that women, I quote, are 50% of the population, and therefore entitled to have their voice heard and respected. In other words, and take this to heart as well, women are not a minority. Women are a part of the majority, 50% of the population, and are entitled to their policy, to have the policymakers listen to their voice. But Golda was a savvy politician and practical, and she knew the treacherous sand dunes around her. She was careful not to declare herself a feminist. She knew that the term feminism and feminist might invite a backlash. She needed the support of men to lead the social reform that she was planning and to succeed in politics. And therefore, she surrounded herself with men, not with women. That is another interesting aspect of Golda's career. Okay? So if we see some of the slides that come forward, just go forward. Who is doing it? Okay, so this is, I'll show you later. This is Golda presenting herself as a housewife. I'm going to come back to it momentarily. But I wanted to show the photo of, I think it's slide 11. Golda at the White House. Here, Golda surrounding herself with men. So you see Golda in the house of the President of Israel, who, as I told you, was her lover in the 30s, and now this is the 60s. And let's go back to that picture. And you see how she surrounds herself. You don't see a woman here. The only woman in the room, only Golda. You don't see any other woman. And if we go forward to see Golda and her cabinet and her military leadership, again, this is during the Yom Kippur War, you see only men, which means that Golda did not make an effort to advance women in military positions, okay? She understood that men preferred to play the field by themselves, and she did not challenge it, which is also very interesting. Throughout her career, and all the way to the top of the political pyramid, men occupied the most important government positions. Cabinet ministers, director generals of governmental offices, persons in the security apparatus, judges and justices of the Supreme Court, all were men, and not necessarily feminist men. This is my major grievance against Golda, and what, in my mind, is the biggest mistake of her career. She did not challenge the conventional expectation that men are better at leadership. She did not trust her own example. As a result, we, the women of my generation, and those who came thereafter, my students, my daughter, my granddaughter, did not have enough role models to look up to. We did not see women in positions of power. And when you do not see women in position of powers, you come to expect that maybe you don't belong there. That's the problem. And she should have done something about it. She thereby became an exception to the rule rather than the rule itself. And that's my grievance. By and large, Golda was admired by the American people and by Israelis. They trusted her, admired her backbone and toughness, and enjoyed her quick wit. For her part, she encouraged them to feel self-righteous and morally superior, such as when she said, and I quote, "We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children, but we can never forgive them for forcing us to kill their children." So now this is a very nice, witty statement, okay? But it fails to nurture empathy and an understanding of the other, okay? It encourages some moral superiority, which I think as a leader she should not have encouraged, okay? Should not have nurtured. But she was so witty, she couldn't help it, and she knew that her audience loved to hear it, okay? The Israelis just love to hear it. Which brings me to the final part of my talk. I wish to talk about Golda and war. In the modern age, and until very recently, a woman who sought a political career was generally channeled towards roles associated with traditional gender roles. Okay? That is, a woman was typically expected to fill the position of a minister of education, a minister of health, and so on. Roles fit for a woman, or associated with women. Golda did not represent this division of labor. As prime minister, she was the civilian head of the Israeli military machine, as we see here. She was the chief of staff here, okay? And she made the final military decisions when it came to the war. She was also the head of the Mossad and also the head of the Shin Bet, the Internal Security Services. In American terms, she was the head of the CIA and of the FBI. Take it to heart. Think about the fact that in the United States, the first woman to be appointed as head of the CIA, Gina Haspel, was confirmed in 2018. Okay? This is 47 years, almost half a century after Golda assumed that position in Israel. Golda understood well Israel's security needs, was familiar with the machination of the security apparatus, and never hesitated to make tough decisions. Okay, such as, I'll just give you one example, the tough decision when on the day that the Yom Kippur started, there was a big debate, an intense debate in the cabinet as to whether to deploy a preemptive strike or not. Okay? And the idea was, if we deploy a preemptive strike, it will be very good for us. We will save a lot of lives. But Golda knew, as a policymaker, that the United States was very much against it. And she knew that if she would authorize a preemptive strike, the United States and the United Nations may go against Israel. Okay? And so things long-term might be more difficult for Israel. And therefore she decided not to do it. She decided not to authorize a preemptive strike. It was a very tough decision that required a lot of courage because a lot of lives were involved. But she did it because she thought long-term that was more important and more beneficial for the state. And this is quite interesting. And yet in 1973, when the Yom Kippur War erupted and inflicted perhaps the deepest trauma on Israel and Israelis, the people looked for a scapegoat, as they always do, and Golda's womanhood was an easy target. The old familiar stereotype of the woman, irrational, emotional, cunning, motivated by hatred, whim and caprice, was revived. And people were encouraged to believe that this was at the root of the Yom Kippur War trauma. Okay? If we didn't have a woman as prime minister, rather we had a man, things might have been very different. That's what people were encouraged to think. I try to document this phenomenon in my book. I'm not trying to claim that Golda did not have her share of blame. I'm not trying to say that. She certainly did. But I do want to point out that some of the blame is animated by traditional gender-based stereotypes and therefore deserve our careful examination. Don't believe everything you hear. So in conclusion, let me dwell a bit further on the issue of self-fulfillment. Golda's consuming passion was politics, but this does not mean that she did not have other passions in her life. She wanted to have a family, she wanted to have children, and she wanted to love and be loved in return. She had all of those. She had 2 children, Menachem and Sarah. Menachem was a musician, a cellist. Sarah was a kibbutznik. Like all mothers, she struggled with the demands of keeping her family and caring for her children while pursuing a very demanding job, a very demanding career. So she knew what it meant to be a working mother. The tension between work and family that every working parent knows is sometimes hard to endure, and the pressure to make sacrifices and compromises is great. Golda would not sacrifice her career, and as a result, she often delegated the responsibility to care for her children to others, her sister, her mother, hired help. There is a painful story where Golda, overwhelmed by her responsibilities for the state in the making, as she was helping the state come to life, that is before Israel was established even, left her very sick 8-year-old daughter in Israel and traveled to the United States to raise funds for the war effort. After years, her daughter, in an interview, said, "I don't understand how she could have done that. I would have never left my child and gone fundraising, for example. I would have never done that." Recently, I heard Mary Louise Kelly, the NPR senior editor, who just published a book about her experiences, say that her rule in work was that the children come first. That the children come first. So maybe if the children came first, you can be a senior editor, but not a prime minister. That's what I ask you to think about. Okay? Golda pursued her own priorities. In hindsight, she justified her decision by assuring the children that in this way they had a more interesting life. They met important people, they were, privy to interesting discussions, and so on and so forth. Maybe so. Maybe she preferred the interesting life to the sometimes tedious, even boring care of children, daily care of children. But the dilemma is there and will not go away. That's what I want to point out. Similarly, Golda did not compromise her sexuality. And after she separated her husband, Maurice, she had she had more lovers, but she had 2 very prominent lovers that were well known. Both were married men. Zalman Shazar, who later became president of the State of Israel, who was married, by the way, to Israel's foremost feminist, and David Remes, who established, those of you who are familiar with Israeli history, he is the guy behind the establishment of the Histadrut, the Federation of Labor, that actually brought the state to being. You may also be interested to know that as a young woman in her early 20s, Golda had an abortion, which was illegal at the time in the United States. She was simply not ready, and I would not fault her for that, and we can discuss that if you are interested. She decided to have her abortion. She needed to go on with her life, and as she never talked about it. This was discovered posthumously in some of the archival materials, but she did need to go on with her life, and going on with her life meant at that time, she was 20 years old, she could not have a child. She wanted to immigrate to Palestine, she wanted to go work in a kibbutz. There were lots of things that she needed to do, and she didn't feel that at the age of 20 to raise a baby was what she could afford. Not only financially, but primarily emotionally. So she had an abortion, but she never talked about it. So what we see before us is a three-dimensional woman. That, I think, is the point. A politician, a socialist, a leader, but also a woman with the same old problems that every woman faces. That's what I want to emphasize and I want to show. Freud, Sigmund, once said that life is about liberty, Liebe und Arbeite, meaning love and work. And I would say that Golda did exactly that. She had a fulfilling love life, if not always happy, and a fulfilling work life as well. She did all of this, she did it all, and of course, paid the price for pursuing her choices. My point is that she faced those choices and knew what she was getting into, what she kept and what she sacrificed. And that, I think, is the important point. This is why I call my book a feminist biography. I try to show how gender-based stereotypes were used and abused for the purpose of targeting Golda's womanhood. In the process, Golda's sterling achievement in the areas of labor law have been ignored, are still ignored, and Israelis are encouraged to think of women as unfit for top leadership positions. That was one of the corrections that I was trying to present. Today, we begin to see a change in the public perception of Golda's role in the Yom Kippur War. A part of the change should be attributed to the willingness of several archives to open their collections. The more you open the collections, the more you see that Golda was involved in writing, with documents, in bringing about a rapprochement or compromises with Anwar Sadat and Egypt. She did try, and it did not succeed, because Sadat also had his own policies and was not willing to compromise either. Another change, so this is one reason, okay, that we begin to rethink Golda's performance. Another part of the change must be attributed to the zeitgeist. Gender equality is more acceptable today than it used to be 30, 40 years ago. What I really wanted to capture in my book is Golda's agency and perseverance in the face of sexism and male chauvinism. That is one of the things that really fascinates me. A lot of women just, when they face it, just give up and go away, okay, or keep quiet. She just continued, okay. She was very stubborn. She was very willing to take the risk and go forward. And I think for this, in this way, she was a role model, and we should value her contribution. I wish to show how, from a very early age, she insisted on her right to self-fulfillment and agency, how she worked hard and against all odds to climb up the political ladder, which was biased and uninviting, and how she had been and should remain a role model to girls and to women who aspire to have a meaningful life. Golda teaches us that being a woman in politics is, as she said, hard. That's what she said to Oriana Fallaci, the famous journalist. Hard. It's not easy to be a woman in politics. So don't fool yourselves, okay? It's difficult, but it's doable. That's what she said. Before Martin Luther King, she already insisted that if this is what a woman wants, she should keep her eyes on the prize and persevere. That was her message. The prize, as she saw it, was a fulfilling career and engagement with the work that she loved, politics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Lahav, for that fascinating talk. We have time for a couple of questions, and from the audience, Kim and I both have microphones. Does anybody have a question? Oh, right there, great.
Something very recent this past week. It seems that it was discovered there was intelligence before the Yom Kippur War, a week beforehand. The Mossad and other organizations had some intelligence of an impending attack, and yet Golda wasn't informed of that, so that the Yom Kippur War was a total surprise.
To her, yeah.
So one wonders if the underlings, people who were working for her, like the Dayan and all these, what was their attitude towards, trusting her to make the right decision?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question, and thank you for asking it. The story is that there was an informant who happened to have been Gamal Abdel Nasser's nephew, or son-in-law, stationed in London, who was informing the Israelis. It's not clear whether he was a double agent or an agent. But he did confirm a day before the war started that a war is about to erupt. He did confirm that. It turns out, and I think that's what you're referring to, that the chief of intelligence, Eli Zeira, did not give Golda this information. Why did he not give? And he was eventually fired by the Commission of Inquiry. Why did he not give her the information? Because he was committed to his view and his analysis. Okay, he was a very arrogant man. He was. He was committed to his view that there is no chance that a war will erupt. So he kept insisting that the possibility or the probability of war erupting in the next week, for example, was lower than reasonable. That's what he said, verbatim. And so he did not bother to report all the information. Golda actually was very worried about that. Golda kept asking, why is it that the Soviets, who had the military delegations in Egypt and in Syria, why is it that they are calling back their people back to Russia? What is going on? Why is this exodus, okay, Russian exodus from Egypt and from Syria? And the intelligence had no answer to that. But she did worry about it. She writes about it in her book, and there is also a lot of evidence in the protocol that she is asking this question all the time. They don't give her an answer. Now, in my view, one of the things that was happening is the chief of staff was and other officers as well, was not the only one. They did not trust Golda. They did not think that a woman can understand military issues. It's as simple as that. Okay. So they did not bother to give her the information. They wanted her to accept their analysis, and that is it. So as a result, she was, I don't want to say that she was kept in the dark, but the messages that she kept getting was, leave it to us. We know what we are talking about. We are doing the right thing. Don't get yourself into it. So that's what we had. That was the result. And this guy, Eli Zeira, eventually was fired from the intelligence. And if you are interested in the further information, this is not relevant here, but the guy who, I don't remember his name, but this double agent who was Egyptian, okay, the Gamal Abdel Nasser's son-in-law, he was mysteriously pushed from a balcony and was killed. Right? And it is said that probably the Egyptians did it, because they realized that he was the source of all the information that the Israelis had. So, this is not relevant, it's just a vignette. But Golda was fighting several fronts. Okay, she was not only trying to understand what the enemy is doing and what to do about that, but she was also fighting the male chauvinist, military officers who thought that they knew better and that she was not sufficiently trustworthy because she was a woman. In fact, she knew a great deal, okay? And in fact, she had a very good understanding of the situation. But that's why I think a part of the lesson of my book is beware. Don't fall into conventionalities. Don't fall into conventions. Think about everything afresh and seriously. I think that's one of the lessons that we learn. I don't see the chief of staff here, so the chief of intelligence here in this. Maybe he did not come to this. This is Golda. In this picture, you see the photo. You see how the entire military apparatus, leadership, come down to the Sinai to meet with the soldiers when the war was fought. Okay, the Yom Kippur War, and you see her. We should appreciate what she's doing here. She is 75 years old. She has cancer. She has lymphoma. She gets chemotherapy once a week or twice a week. And nevertheless, she collects herself. She goes on the plane. She goes down to the Sinai, which is very hot and unpleasant for an older woman, to meet with the soldiers and encourage them to go on. That's what she's doing here. And you see how worried she is.
Yes, okay, any other questions? Yeah, okay.
My mother was her assistant in New York when she was the head of WITHDRAWal. And part of my mother's job was to take the children out rowing so that Golda could meet with some of her romantic followers.
Very well.
Okay, so that's not a question, that's an insight. Wow.
You always learn something.
Yeah, so it sounds
Amazing.
like Prime Minister Golda Meir was quite the woman.
Absolutely. Yes.
In many ways, a typical
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other
Absolutely.
questions or comments? Insights? Anybody else have a connection here?
Maybe we could just, if you look at this photo, those of you who are familiar with Moshe Dayan, you see him here, right here. He was the minister of.
Okay.
This is Moshe Dayan. And she was afraid that he will veto her policies. There was always the danger that he is going to veto her policies, resign, and the cabinet will fall apart exactly when the war is going on. Okay, so she was under tremendous pressure.
She had to be a great diplomat at that point.
Huh?
She had to be a really great diplomat at
That
that
point,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So this was quite. She had a very difficult job. That's what I'm trying to say. And the difficult job, I always think about it. She had a very difficult job. She was sick. She was old. Okay. And nevertheless, she persevered. It's a great example of the strength of a woman, okay, who goes forward and accomplishes the task. I think it's quite. The more I think about it, the more the older I become, the more I understand how difficult it was for her to go through this.
What do you? Were you able to determine what her biggest regret was?
Her biggest regrets?
Yeah. Did she have any?
Oh, I'm sure that she had a lot of regrets. I think that I think the war was. I have no doubt that she had a lot of regrets. I mean, you cannot, if you're a human being and you understand,
Were you able
Yes.
to determine what they were? From your perspective?
I think, it's a very good question. As a politician, she always tried to hide and to claim that she did the right thing and to justify whatever it is that she did. That's what politicians do. That's what most people do, right? So I think, when I read about her, I think what really bothered her was how did the war come about, and did she do enough in order to prevent the war? Okay? So on the one hand, there was the question of did she do enough? The other thing is, did she communicate to the people of Israel? all the things that she did do in order to communicate, in order to prevent the war and reach a decision, which she did not. So actually what happened is, once the war started, people did not know. She said, it's all in the archives, right? And then she said, one day the archives will be opened and you will see everything. But she did not, in real time, she did not work towards declassifying documents so that people will see, or information, what the state of Israel is doing or what the government is doing in order to prevent, to avoid the war. And she might have regretted it later. This is one thing that she regretted. But there are other things, if I see that you are familiar with many of the stories. So, for example, another thing that she must have, I'm sure that she regretted neglecting her children in the way that she did. I have no doubt about it. To sit there in front of the television cameras and hear her own daughter saying, I would have never left my child, sick, and go to the United States fundraising, I think this is like a dagger in your heart, right? How many times did she think about it? I'm sure many. And it's a lesson. I think these are things, the reason I mentioned it and I raised them, these are things that we should discuss, because that's what most politicians do, men and women. And these are things that we should be reflecting about and debating about. What is the right thing to do?
Right.
Okay?
Thank you. I think we're going to wrap it up now. We're at the end of our hour, and we do have...
Question.
Oh, one more question. Yes?
Would you feel the same way if she were a man?
Oh,
and left her kids?
Do you think it would be the
Older
same?
Israelis older Israelis who left their kids to go abroad to do all kinds of things for the country, and nobody said a word because they are not the mother. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about equality, we're talking about the role of the woman, and I think this is one area where we have to accept that if a woman is going to be equal to a man, we need to look at both of them the same way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not easy, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
It's not easy.
Exactly.
The fact that I'm surprised that her daughter was so adamant about it. As a child, I'm sorry, because I know, kids whose father have left.
Yes.
Again, Israeli.
And they don't, absolutely, they take it for granted. That's what fathers do, right?
And we seem to...
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you can forgive the daughter. There are lots of ways that you can think about it. I agree with your analysis. I don't want to... But as the daughter was watching, it was a segment on television, and she was, and other people were also telling the story how the daughter, Sarah, was so sick, and was taken. Actually, she was taken to a hospital in New York, to Beth Israel, and it turns out that she got. This is also important for all of us to remember. She was misdiagnosed. The girl, the daughter. And once the American doctors in New York fixed the treatment, she recovered very quickly. So the Israeli doctors in those days, this was the 30s, were not so, good. So, but when the daughter hears the story again on television, she said, I don't understand how she did it. I would have never done it. And I'm sure this is a trauma in her heart that remained all her life. That her mother left her. Now, so we can understand her as a little girl, 8 years old, right?
Yeah.
Wanting her mother.
Right, but we shouldn't judge.
But we should also understand that other men, we know that Ben-Gurion, for example, the great founder of the State of Israel, was a great man, but he did not take care of his children, And he didn't think it was his duty or his, he did not really pay attention to that. So when a man does it, nobody asks questions, right? We accept it. When a woman does it, we suddenly remember that somebody needs to take care of the children. Mm-hmm. But that's the point. That's the point. That's what we always have to remember. We did not resolve this issue yet.
No.
Huh?
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Very unfortunately. But, there is a book called Unfinished Business, okay? By Marianne, I forget her name right now, Marianne Slaughter, okay? I think she's the dean of the... Anne-Marie Slaughter. And Anne-Marie wrote this book, Unfinished Business. What did she mean by unfinished business? We have not resolved this issue. So we expect a lot from the woman. We don't expect as much as from the men. It's true.
Excellent. Okay, so let's go to the book signing portion. Let's give a round of applause for Professor Lahav. And Laboratory Books is here to sell, and if you want to purchase a book for signing, Kim is at the back. We have platters of cookies and some cold refreshments. Please stay, mingle, talk. So many interesting questions that we could talk about based upon this wonderful lecture that really did illustrate the importance of having strong leaders, both male and female, and choosing that life path that's less traveled and making your own way in the world. So many important lessons that you imparted for us today. Thank you so much for coming to Princeton and being a part of the Phyllis Marchand Leadership Lecture Series.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.